Dobro jutro. Sretna sabota. So those of you who want an English service have come to the wrong one. Friends, it's a pleasure to be back with you in Salisbury. We thank the Lord that we are able to meet together and worship together again. Just think of all that has happened since we were last here together. We live in a different world. And I guess the question is, so what? What does it all mean? Well, friends, I want to tell you this Sabbath morning that I believe that it means a lot. I believe with all my heart that God has sent us a wake-up call. Because the things that we have been preaching as a church for over 100 years, all of a sudden is happening. But maybe we are snoozing through the sirens that God is sending us. It's time to wake up, to be aware of what is happening and what it actually means to us. You know, when I was a boy, and I'm just trying to make sure that I'm getting some signal here, because I want to share with you my own experience and why I believe that God is sending us a wake-up call. So, do I need to try again, or do I need another presser here? What shall we do? Let's let's see what we can organize here. And so I try again. Still no response here. So I'm going to try another clicker. This is a Serbian clicker that's going to work well. Let's see. Okay, there we go. All right. When I was a boy, my parents traveled with us as a family from New Zealand to Australia, our homeland, and then all the way across to Africa. Now, you can make that trip today probably in 12 hours. But back in those days, it took 3 weeks because you had to go by boat, by ship. It took a long, long time. And by the way, Svetlana and Gabriel, great music. God has given you a wonderful gift, and thank you for sharing it with us today. Wonderful. So it took 3 weeks, and one of the places we lived, my parents went as missionaries to Africa. They went for 3 years originally, and we ended up staying there for 13 years. And one of the cities that we lived in was the beautiful city of Cape Town. Let me see if I can get some action here. When we moved to our house in Cape Town, we discovered that we lived virtually next door to 2 big institutions. One was a hospital, and the other was a fire station. Well, when we arrived there the first day, my sister and I, young children, we thought, this is fantastic. There are sirens going all day. But when night came, the sirens did not stop. They went not just during the day, but also during the night. We couldn't sleep 1 second as those sirens went on and on all through the night. No sleep. But then, as the days went by, thank the Lord, something very interesting happened. We became used to the sirens. And when night came, we slept through the sirens before very long. We became so accustomed to those sirens, we slept right through those sirens, even if an ambulance or a fire engine went right underneath our window. We slept through all those sirens. And it was a great blessing to us. But you know, friends, there are times when sleeping through the sirens becomes a life and death issue. And that is exactly what happened in a little town in the United States of America called Joplin, in the state of Missouri. Here in Joplin, one day the sirens sounded, but nobody paid attention. Let me tell you a little about what happened. They were struck by what is called today a super tsunami or tornado. And you can see it on the horizon there. This was an EF5 multiple vortex tornado. That's the highest intensity rating for tornadoes around the world, certainly in the United States. This tornado was like no other. It struck this city at 5:40 p.m. one day in May. And friends, the devastation was unbelievable. The winds, when it landed in the western part of this city, the winds were 320 k's an hour. It's hard to imagine, isn't it? And those winds peaked at 400 k's an hour. Even the strongest houses and buildings cannot withstand a tornado like that. There is no answer. I'm pressing my button here and not a lot is happening because I want to give you an idea of the devastation. Let me just go back here. Whole suburbs were flattened. Look at that. That was once a street with houses on either side. Whole suburbs were flattened. Included in those that were flattened were literally 8,000 homes in that town of Joplin were flattened virtually instantly because this tornado tore a path 1.6 kilometers wide and 36 kilometers long. Can you imagine that? Just total devastation. A wind like this can pick up a railway carriage weighing 75 tons and hurl it hundreds of kilometers. Cars were picked up and thrown several blocks. Hundreds of them, thousands of them. Some of them were never ever found. They were just pummeled and flattened. This tornado, as I mentioned, destroyed 8,000 homes. In addition to that, it destroyed 4 schools, a complete hospital, a fire station, and as I mentioned earlier, destroyed over 15,000 cars, vehicles. Unbelievable. It was the most expensive tsunami, typhoon in history. Try to wrap your head around this. It did $3 billion worth of damage in that town in Missouri. $3 billion. Sadly, not only was it the most expensive tornado in history, the history of the planet, it was also the most deadly. 161 people lost their lives. Terrible tragedy. But friends, here's what makes it extra sad. Joplin was accustomed to tornadoes. They'd had 3 tornadoes already. And so to ensure that people were warned when tornadoes were coming, the town set up a siren system that when they detected on the radar tornadoes coming, they would set off the sirens across the city so people would know that there was a tornado coming and could seek shelter from that tornado. And on this Sunday, May Day, the sirens went off across Joplin. But you know, it was a beautiful day. The sun was shining. People were out enjoying the Sunday, the sunny Sunday. And so they paid no attention to the sirens. Some people heard the sirens and thought, we've got plenty of time. There's nothing to worry about here. We're going to be okay. When we see the tornado coming, we will find safety then. But my friends, when that tornado touched down in western Joplin at 5:40 p.m. that afternoon, it was too late. There was no place to hide. And so 161 people lost their lives and thousands were injured across the city of Joplin. And friends, when I think about Joplin, the sirens that warned people of the danger that was coming, I can't help thinking about the damage that was done, the lives that were lost, and I cannot think about the world we live in today. Because I believe that God is sending us prophetic sirens that are ringing loud and clear, telling us that danger is approaching. The sirens are ringing, telling us that time is short. We are running out of time. Just think about what has happened in the last 12 months, 2020. The year started with, do you remember the bushfires? The worst bushfires in living memory. After the bushfires came the floods and the storms and hailstones as big as tennis balls in some part of Australia. And as if that wasn't enough, then we were struck with COVID-19. All happened. But isn't it amazing we've kind of come to terms with it all now, haven't we? Everything's okay. We're going to return back to normal, we believe. The vaccines are on the way. Just think about this for a moment. Our country and the world was brought to its knees by a virus 10,000 times smaller than a grain of rice. Think about that for a moment. Friends, I believe the Bible has a lot to say about the times that you and I are living in. I believe that God in His Word has outlined what we are witnessing today. I believe that we are living in that period of time that the prophets wrote about. That period of time that the disciples asked about. That period of time that God's people down through the ages have wanted to live through. You and I are there. We are living through that period. But the question is this. The sirens are ringing. The signs are here. But are we snoozing through those sirens? Friends, I believe that what is happening today is a wake-up call that God is sending this planet and in particular His people. I believe we are seeing the great prophetic time clock move towards the second coming of Jesus Christ. Friends, I believe that we are living on the verge of eternity. And so I want to just share with you this morning 7 signs that Jesus in the Bible talks about that tell us we are living on borrowed time. Jesus is coming soon. The Bible provides us with that information. Let's start with coronavirus. Jesus said, remember the disciples came to Jesus and said, tell us, what is the sign of your coming and the end of the world? Give us some signs, some sirens that will wake us up and tell us that you're coming. Jesus said there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of what? Birth pains. Birth pains. So there Jesus lists. And He says, I'm going to list 3 signs in the natural world, as it were. And these will be like birth pangs. Now, ladies in particular, we know what birth pangs are, don't we? They are those contractions that tell us that the arrival of our child is near. Isn't that right? And those birth pangs, I've watched at least 4 deliveries. Those birth pangs start off kind of far apart. Isn't that right, ladies? And then they get closer and closer together. Isn't that right? Isn't that right? They get closer and closer together. And as they get closer and closer, what does it tell you? The time has come. We're there. Jesus says that these signs will be like birth pangs. In other words, they will start off further and further, far apart. And then as we see them getting closer and closer together, we're going to know what? Jesus is coming. Isn't that correct? And so, friends, that's what Jesus tells us. And so I want you to think about coronavirus for a while. We see the birth pangs, I believe, getting closer and closer. A reminder that time is running out. A reminder that we're on the verge of eternity. Just think back through the last few decades and think of the viruses, the pandemics that we have seen. There was Ebola. There was SARS. There was MERS. But you see them getting closer and closer together. And now we have coronavirus, COVID-19. Friends, I believe that God is sending us a message. That the birth pangs, the distance, the time difference between those pangs, the time difference is getting closer and closer. And so we see here the Bible giving us an indicator that we are living on borrowed time. The coronavirus brings us a message. It's a wake-up call. And so there is sign number one that tells us that Jesus is coming soon. Coronavirus, pestilences, we see them coming one after another, but now we see them getting closer and closer together. Second sign. The coronavirus has brought with it a lot of spin-off effects, collateral damage. Yeah, I'm going to get just there. I think you can come and preach with me. We can do it together. You're reading my mind. Yeah. But friends, there has been collateral damage. There have been spin-off effects as a result of coronavirus. And one of the greatest is a fear that has struck the very heart of our society. We're worried. We're concerned about ourselves. We're concerned about our families. We're wondering whether we're going to have work to put bread on the table. And that fear we have seen in a very literal and tangible way. What happened when coronavirus started? What did people do? Didn't they rush into the supermarket and they bought the loo paper and the hand sanitizer, and then it was the pasta, wasn't it? And on it went. Why did that happen? What if people just went on living normally? There's always been sufficient of all of those items in the supermarket. There's not a shortage, ever is there? But people were afraid, isn't that right? They weren't sure about what was going to happen. And so they rushed out and they panicked and they panic bought. Correct? Yeah? And so we saw people filling their trolleys, their grocery trolleys, with products, all because they were afraid of a virus 10,000 times smaller than a grain of rice. Fear, panic gripped society. And it's continuing, isn't that right? The next big question is, okay, the vaccines are here. Should I have one? And if I should, which one should I have? Isn't that right? I mean, you just read social media and the fears and the concerns that people have, first for the virus and now for the cure. And people are asking, which is worse? Fear. We're afraid. We're afraid of the unknown. What did Jesus say there in Luke's gospel? Talking about the signs, what did he say? Men's hearts failing them for fear for the what? The things coming upon the earth. Friends, this is a fear that is something different, something new. I believe it's a sign that God is sending to remind us that He's coming soon. People are afraid. People are afraid. Then I want you to think of some of the other things that we have witnessed during the last 12 months as kind of connected with coronavirus. Think of the violence that we have seen, the lawlessness. It's unbelievable. The lawlessness that we have seen in the very heart of democracy. Have you seen those American cities burn? Minneapolis, Chicago, New York, Atlanta. I can go on and on listing them. We've never seen anything like this. Whole suburbs, town centers, CBDs going up in smoke. Vandalism, violence, and lawlessness. Do you remember in Washington when the American election drew close? The shopkeepers boarding up their windows and doors because they were afraid of the violence, the riots, the demonstrations. Friends, what does it all mean? What is happening to our world? Do you remember the protests? Protests that turned violent, that turned ugly, and then the actual invasion of the Capitol itself. Lawlessness, violence. And friends, it's not just related to the politics in North America. We see a lawlessness, a violence that our world hasn't seen before. We see extreme Islam. And we've watched the violence that have been perpetrated. We've seen white supremacists. We've seen a whole range of different groups marching, fighting, lawlessness. Remember what Jesus said in Matthew 24? As we approach the end of time. Notice what he said, friends. And because what will abound? Lawlessness. Lawlessness will abound. The love of many will grow cold. Let me tell you, friends, this isn't going away. Because the issues that now divide society are never going to be resolved and accepted by everyone. You just think of the issues that divide these societies that we've been talking about. These issues are abortion, marriage, LGBTQ. This is what it's all about. These are big issues that are not going away. And so the violence, the lawlessness, the protests are only going to get more frequent and worse. Because the issues cannot be resolved. You've got one part of society who believe one thing, you've got another part of society who believes something totally different, and they are never going to come together. Friends, birth pangs. Remember the birth pangs? We see these issues getting closer and closer. So there's our third sign, lawlessness. Then back to the natural world. Let me just say this. God said there would be signs in the natural world. Do you know that there's an increase of 20% over the previous year? This is natural disasters have increased 27% over the previous year, that's last year, and 3 times more than 30 years ago. Do you notice what's happening? An increase in the regularity of these natural disasters. The time between them is coming closer and closer and closer. More of them, more regularly. Friends, that's what the scientists are telling us. The researchers are telling us. What does it mean? Do you remember what Jesus said? That there will be signs in the natural world. And that's exactly what we are seeing on an increasing basis. Notice what he says, and there will be famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in various places. But they're meaningless to us. They are like water off a duck's back. Did you hear yesterday 3 huge earthquakes off the coast of New Zealand? 1 over 8 on the Richter scale. So what? Do we care? Friends, It's happening before our very eyes. But I just make the point. The sirens are sounding, but too many of us are snoozing through the sirens. The natural disasters that we see have become so regular that we just take them for granted. They're meaningless to us now. Think about some of the things that have been happening in society. Things that have been happening around our world. You know, with coronavirus, we had the lockdowns, didn't we? Even here in Queensland. Schools closed. Factories closed. And you know what? People realized that there were positive benefits when that happened. When there were no cars on the road, they realized that interesting things were happening. And governments were able to implement rules and regulations that took away our freedoms. And what did we say? We said, that's okay. Because we are on a war footing. We're at war with this terrible virus. And government, you do whatever you like. We will accept it. Isn't that right? By and large. Isn't that correct? And so, friends, as a result of this virus, and by the way, I'm in favor of the restrictions. I know we have to have these things, but I'm just making the point that governments around the world were able to use coronavirus lockdowns and regulations to deprive people of freedoms beyond coronavirus restrictions. 50 countries around the world took away their citizens' freedoms under the pretext of coronavirus regulations. And you know what? Nobody complained. In fact, many of these governments were returned to power with an increased majority. Why? Because people said, we don't know how to deal with this. We've got to trust someone. Who will we put our trust in? The politicians, the government, the media. What? Isn't that what happened? And so our freedoms are taken from us, and we say, that's okay. We are prepared to accept it as a society. And so, friends, as a result of what has happened with coronavirus, we have seen a loss of freedoms, tracking devices, all sorts of things in countries around the world, and we all shrug our shoulders and say, well, that's what's necessary. But friends, let me say this. As we see these regulations and in other countries enforced, people losing their rights, their freedoms, we need to remember that the Lord has told us that it means something, because these restrictions, these freedoms the loss of them have long-term implications. So let me just go back to the loss of our freedoms. Remember this, the Lord tells us that eventually there will come a time when our freedoms will be so restricted that unless we follow the dictates of a religio-political power that is going to influence all that happens on planet Earth, do you know what, friends? You won't be able to buy or sell. Such will be the restriction of freedoms. I believe we are seeing the birth pangs begin. It's happening, and the world is happy to accept the loss of freedoms if they think it's for the greater good. Let me move on to another phenomena that has happened as a result of COVID. as restrictions have been applied, as schools have been closed, as factories have been closed, as there have been a reduction of cars on the road, as I mentioned earlier, there have been some good outcomes as a result of this situation. Our friend, who many see as the leader of the religious world, has been making some very interesting statements about all of this. He has said, and this started, by the way, to be very clear in 2015. So that's 6 years ago now. He wrote an encyclical called Laudato Si, in which he said creation is going to strike back against the abuse that we are making against the natural world. And friends, there's no doubt about it, we as humans are messing with the natural world, with nature. And so our friend Pope Francis has said that COVID is part of a phenomena of nature striking back so that it has a chance to better survive. Associated with this reduction in emissions and pollution and all the rest of it has come a call in that encyclical for us to have 1 day a week where we close everything down. That's what it says. That's what he's promoting. And you know what? The scientists, the politicians, the scholars and the academics are saying, hey, he may have something there. He may have a point. Why don't we have a day of rest? Why don't we have a day off? Creation needs a day of rest, and so do we. Would we agree with that? Would we agree with those sentiments so far? Of course we would, because that was God's original plan, was it not? To have a day of rest each week. What day did God say that day should be? The seventh day Sabbath. He put it in the very heart of his law. But our friend in the Vatican says the same thing, except not the seventh day, but the first day. And friends, that whole concept is gaining momentum, not just in the world of religion, but across politics, across academics. There is a move to make Sunday an enforced day of rest, where we close everything down and we let the earth recover from all the misuse that we have given it. Friends, I believe that COVID has made it quite likely that we are seeing a stronger and stronger move across society, not just amongst the religious world, for Sunday laws to be implemented. But friends, let me say this. It's not all bad news. It's not all doom and gloom. Because COVID and all that's associated with it has also brought about a hunger in people's hearts for the truth of God. People have listened to the politicians. They've listened to our health professionals. And now they are wanting to listen to God, and they're asking this question. What does all this mean? What does God have to say about what's happening in our world? In our ministry, and this is true of all ministries that I've been in contact with, we are seeing a flood of inquiries, people wanting to know. What does the Bible say about this? What does Bible prophecy have to say about what is happening in our world now? We want to know. What is God saying? And so, friends, we are seeing a desire in people's hearts to study the Bible, to find out more about God's Word. And you know, friends, for the first time in human history, we are able through media today to reach every person on the planet. Hasn't been possible before. But now we can. And let me tell you, it's happening. And people are responding. People are responding to the gospel invitation to accept Jesus, to follow His word, the Bible, and to prepare for the soon coming of Jesus. Friends, it's happening on a scale we have never, ever seen before. What does it all mean? To see this hunger for the Word of God. To see people want to get a Bible for themselves so they can study God's Word. They want to hear about Jesus. They want to hear the message of Jesus. Do you remember the final sign that Jesus gave in Matthew 24? And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached where? In all the world. And what will happen then? Then the end will come. My friends, it's happening. The sirens are blaring. We dare not snooze through those sirens. The gospel is going to all the world. The signs are being fulfilled. The sirens are sounding. We see them in what we've seen in the COVID-19 coronavirus and the pestilences that we see. We hear the siren with the fear that we see in our society. The sirens are ringing with the lawlessness, the violence that we're experiencing. We see natural disasters, the loss of freedom, a move towards Sunday laws, and the gospel going to all the world. My friends, God is sending us a wake-up call. Friends, we are living on the verge of eternity. Jesus is coming soon. And the big question is this: are you and I ready? Are we ready for Jesus to come? Oh, friends, it is my prayer this Sabbath morning, this rest day that God has given us. It's my prayer this Sabbath morning that every one of us here, together with our families, will wake up and be found ready and waiting to meet Jesus when He comes. Can I just end with, after Matthew 24, after Jesus has given all these signs, He tells a story. Did you know that? He tells a story after outlining the signs to tell us how close we are to the coming of Jesus. He tells a story about 10 young women who all fell asleep. They all fell asleep while they were waiting for what? For the bridegroom to come, isn't that right? They all fell asleep. These are people who had accepted an invitation to the wedding feast, isn't that right? They'd all accepted an invitation. These were Christians. They were all waiting for the bridegroom to come. And they all fell asleep. When the bridegroom actually came, half of them had heeded the wake-up call and were prepared and ready. Isn't that right? Friends, God is talking to Adventists here. It's a story specifically for Adventists. We're waiting for the bridegroom to come, aren't we? We believe that Jesus is coming back, don't we? The question is, are we still asleep? Only 5, half, were ready. Imagine, friends, do you know what Jesus is telling us? Which half? Of our congregation, the Lord is saying, half of you are not going to be ready. And you and I have to decide which half we're going to be in. I say again, friends, it's my prayer this morning that when Jesus comes, we will all be ready to meet him so that we can spend eternity together with Jesus in his kingdom. May God bless you.